Responsible programming, exploring solutions that address the imminent disconnect between the traumatic experiences of marginalized persons and the social obligations of a choral ensemble, by Harry Mathurin-Cecil and Matthew Moquin-Lee.
More than anything else, individual artists and arts organizations should strive to avoid the artistic equivalent of a soundbite. This powerful quote comes from Kareem Rustam's provocative article, Cultural Empathy Requires More Than Soundbites. For a long time, the arts have been a place where reflection, introspection, and criticism of a society occurs. Artists often jump at the opportunities to convey sympathetic and emotional triggering responses to the world they see around them. But what happens when the content is so traumatic that it can be harmful to your own ensemble members? In recent years, a racial awakening has emerged with increased announcements of unarmed Black people killed by law enforcement. Once again, ensembles and arts organizations are ready to react. But how should they respond? Does engagement require more than an isolated performance? Are the performance members given a place of safety to discuss, be counseled, and if necessary, be allowed to abstain from the preparation and performance? A simplistic artistic interpretation of another culture, no matter how well-intentioned, can do more harm than good. It can be problematic to have an ensemble render an isolated performance of certain culturally sensitive repertoire without the proper pre-research and engagement with the performing group and related community. This paper will seek to define the proper approach of programming and empathy within the classroom or ensemble space. We will provide context to the problem that may develop with having an ensemble engage in culturally and socially sensitive repertoire and challenge leaders in their responsibility to go beyond simple performance. This paper focuses on a particular event that occurred in the first week of the fall 2021 semester at the College Conservatory of Music. Joelle Thompson's 7 Last Words of the Unarmed was programmed for one of the accredited CCM choral ensembles. This multi-movement work is about 7 Black men who were killed by the police. We will explore how this work was received by the ensemble students at CCM during that first week of the school year. Along with describing their experiences and reactions to this work, we will reference scholarly articles and interviews that lay out how these problematic issues can develop and what we as choral music educators can do to avoid such pitfalls. We have 3 firsthand accounts of how 7 Last Words was received by the ensemble members. 2 undergraduate students and 1 of the graduate assistants for the class, our own co-author, Matthew Lee.
During the first week of the fall 2021 semester at CCM, the CCM chorale was scheduled to rehearse a variety of pieces that centered around a social justice theme. The concert, scheduled for November 2021, featured a world premiere piece highlighting the poetry of a detained youth refugee at the Mexican border, a work describing the trials and tribulations of a gay Black man during the Civil Rights Movement, composed by Cincinnati's own Steve Malloy, and a work recounting the last words of 7 unarmed Black men before they were gunned down by police officers. All 3 pieces carry a profound amount of weight and impact, but one piece in particular, the 7 Last Words of the Unarmed by Joelle Thompson, raised a number of concerns with its ensemble members. On the first day of school, Monday was like any other first day of school in which introductions were given, the syllabus was reviewed, the choir stood up, warmed up, and began reading the 3rd movement of the 7 Last Words of the Unarmed, Mom, I'm Going to College, without any context or prior conversation. To give context about this piece, the words Mom, I'm Going to College were the words of 22-year-old Amadou Diallo and that he said to his mother on their last encounter. In the early morning of February 4th, 1999, Diallo was said to have pulled a gun on police officers, to which 4 officers shot 42 times. 19 of the 42 shots hit and killed Diallo. Investigators later stated that he was not armed, but that he was reaching for his wallet. In a world today where there continues to be racism and gun violence, these heightened senses and intolerances for injustice by today's youth, particularly BIPOC individuals, are named and lauded for their bravery and courage to speak out. During the first read of Mom, I'm Going to College, I vividly remember students looking around the room at their classmates, seeking a sense of comfort from their colleagues. Several of the students approached the conductor about the discomfort in doing these pieces, to which he responded, "We're going to have a guest conductor come in to talk about this piece to us on Saturday. We will discuss it then. While we firmly believe that the conductor's intentions were good, we agree that they were not presented in the proper manner, nor was there a safe space created and trust built within the ensemble to present such a heavily weighted piece. And here is an audio example of Mom, I'm Going to College.
We asked two students from the class to discuss their reactions to how the Thompson work was presented and how it was received by the class. Both students are in undergraduate CCM programs. Both are African American. It should be acknowledged, however, that by the end of the week, student one was still willing to perform the work. Student two was not. BIPOC students are not a monolith. They can and do differ in their experiences, wants, and needs. Stephen Seek, the author of Teaching with Respect, Inclusive Pedagogy for Choral Directors, further explains. It is easy to treat 50 singers as a monolithic entity and very hard to treat 50 singers as 50 humans. The choir is not a personality. It's the aggregate behavior of multiple personalities who bring multiple positions and perspectives to the group. But we must acknowledge that the musical result comes from 50 very different people who have very different needs. The more we come to know and understand our singers' individual experiences and journeys, the more complicated and beautiful and real our teaching becomes. For consistency, both students were asked the same questions. Here are their responses. In your own words, please describe what happened the first week of school in the CCM ensemble. Student one, I don't think I'll ever forget that day. The day the student is referencing is the Friday of that first week. The ensemble had already experienced 2 rehearsals with the music, Monday and Wednesday. It was apparent by the mood of the group and by isolated expressions of concern that a discussion about this repertoire, as well as the other justice pieces on the concert, needed to be addressed. The professor brought in one of the composers, Steve Malloy, to aid in communicating the importance of this music. They designated the full class session to an open discussion about the context of Seven Last Words and the other concert selections. Student one welcomed the opportunity to sing this music. Rather than being upset, she thought, oh, this is interesting. I want to know more. She went on to say that I was on the team of we should be doing this work because as choral singers and choral performers, it is our job to educate. At the end of the day, bringing communities closer together and giving audiences opportunities to have conversations outside of concerts is our job.
Student 2. We started looking at the pieces that were specific to Black and African diaspora. We just dove right into the music. We didn't pause and reflect on what the text meant. We started singing the piece about violent crimes against Black people. What has been happening since antebellum times is still prevalent today. As one might imagine, there was a great deal of shock from student 2 as the ensemble just dove right in. Melanie Memore suggests that we explore collaboration and create dialogue to build trust before jumping right into a piece that is culturally sensitive. An example of the said collaboration and discussion of culturally sensitive materials is Kenesha Cicero's Watson's interaction with the Chicago Children's Chorus. Cisnero Watson was building trust with the Native American ensemble Medicine Trail and the Chicago Children's Chorus so that the 2 groups could share a performance. She brought the ensemble Medicine Trail to lead a workshop and to teach the singers of Chicago Children's Chorus about the members' respective tribes and the different types of music the clinicians perform. The clinicians engaged the students in lively discussion about the ways in which they, Medicine Trail, use their voices, drumming, and dancing to express and preserve their culture. After this exchange, the ensemble felt comfortable enough to participate in a joint concert in Chicago Children's Chorus annual World Music Festival. The example pursued by Chicago Children's Chorus is pursuing dialogue with a systematically marginalized community, took great care and effort to understand the struggles and identity of the said community prior to the performance. In the primary example cited in this paper, the situation may have been better handled if they similarly had started out in dialogue.
Question 2. How were your classmates reacting to the events that were occurring? Student 1. Our conductor messed up. He humbly recognized that a conversation should have taken place. It seemed, however, that by the time the conversation occurred, too much trauma had developed as shown by how intense Friday's open forum had been. Student 1 continued. The conversation got heated pretty quickly and made it difficult to have a conversation. It became a thing as we should not perform this work because it is not our truth to tell. As student 1 was one of the singers still interested in performing the work, she presented a counter argument. She argued about all the music that we already sing that is divergent from our daily lives. And I quote, "What connection do you have to religious music if you are not religious? What connection do you have to Portuguese music if you're not Portuguese? We should be able to perform this work to present the truths of Black men who were shot and killed." But their argument rendered no positive response. The room was divided.
Student 2 responded to the question by saying more of us than not were upset with how the piece was handled. We weren't upset with the piece itself. Many of us were looking forward to a piece that centered around the BIPOC community. We were all kind of shocked. We felt like the music was being approached with a lack of seriousness because we felt the weight of the words were approaching. But part of me was like, oh my gosh, This is so monumental because I thought we were going to be singing Haydn, Mozart, etc. Another part of me felt off put because it felt like we were brushing aside the lives we were presenting. It is clear in student two's response that he was genuinely excited about the initial thought of performing a monumental piece. However, he was discouraged and off put by the lack of care and absence of dialogue regarding the topic that is still very prevalent today.
Question 3. What, if anything, about this situation was triggering for you? Student 1. I left that day in tears. I called my mom and sobbed. We asked why. Because of the energy, we could not come together. But there was also another, more personal reason why student 1 left that day dejected. She was reckoning with her own identity. And I quote, "It was a very triggering conversation because I am one who is growing in their Blackness. I can recognize white people and their ignorance, but I was watching a lot of my Black peers saying they did not want to do it, and I was on the other side saying I did want to do it." Seek explains, when the choir transcends being an it and becomes a group of singers with their own stories, we see a rich and haunting collection of powerful life experiences, each in some process of grief or pain. Choir can help heal these wounds, but choir can also inadvertently open them.
Student 2 said, as I was looking through the piece, there was a movement that repeated, "Don't shoot." This was particularly triggering to me as it brought me to my own experiences with police officers. Seeing that was triggering to me. Later on in the interview process, we asked if there was a point during the week in which you decided that you were not going to perform the piece, to which he responded, by Friday of that week. We didn't talk about the piece on Monday, and Wednesday we really didn't either. If we continued down this path before we got into this for real, I wanted to step in and stop it. Joy Hirokawa raises up in her Choral Journal article, Choral Village, an immersive experience to build cultural sensitivity and empathy. The choral directors want to believe that the main reason singers show up for rehearsal is for the music. However, she argues, some studies suggest that the main reason may actually be due to the psychological well-being they experience from being part of a group. She goes on to cite Daniel Weinstein and others saying that they suggest that singing in groups promotes social closeness, consistent with evolutionary accounts that emphasize the role of music in social bonding, and that music making may have been a catalyst for social bonding. But how could something that is supposed to promote community and social bonding be so divisive and uncomfortable, causing students to relive past trauma? Herein lies the problem. What we aim to do is to explore the solutions that address the imminent disconnect between the traumatic experiences of marginalized persons and the social obligation that these artistic groups to bond, empathize, and stand in solidarity with these same persons and groups.
Solutions. While there is no formulaic procedure we can administer that will ensure that the ensemble is engaged in the work, feels safe, and the process will be executed without fail, there are a few guidelines that scholars have offered. Our student interviewees also suggested steps that could be taken to better serve the ensemble and the music. Step 1, start with empathy, patience, and a connection. Step 2, build a process of learning and preparation. Step 3, do the work. Empathy, patience, and connection. Both students identified that one of the biggest issues they had with Seven Last Words of the Unarmed was not in the content, but in the timing. The students had just started their semester. For many of them, this was their first collegiate ensemble experience. They were strangers to each other, and they were strangers to the conductor in the room. There was no human connection. And if there's no connection, then of course there is no empathy. Because it was introduced on the first day of classes, it is apparent that this process also lacked patience. While it is tempting to rush a well-meaning artistic reply out into the world in response to one of the daily or hourly outrages we are confronted with during the 24-hour news cycle, a rush project risks having little immediate or lasting impact. That's a quote from Ralston in his article. Moreover, When there is no connection built among the ensemble members, a lack of trust remains. Student 1 agrees. I quote, choir is about community and connection. If you cannot be on the same page as the person next to you, you would not be able to create the connection in the music that you would want. The conductor also needs time to get to know the members of their ensemble and their stories. This is when true empathy can develop. Seek explains the importance of knowing each singer as he referenced another piece about trauma. Quote, when we acknowledge that sometimes I feel like a motherless child will feel differently to someone losing her mother, we approach the repertoire selection instruction with more empathy, compassion, and respect. We see that this work has different emotional connotations for different singers, and we do not presume that our experience is everyone's. We leave space for this to be difficult. Student 1 stresses how empathy and compassion in an ensemble are valued greatly over tyrannical requirements to perform. They would have been open to performing Seven Last Words, quote, if the right space had been created and the right conversations would have been had, and if there were expressions that there was a safe space to take time out. Instead, you have to do this music or your grade will suffer, was what was expressed. Building a process of learning and preparation. Ralston contends that when presenting any music from a different culture, a process of learning is paramount. Quote, the process of learning about this foreign culture is just as important as the end result, the concert, the composition, etc. If any corners are cut in the process, then the project will suffer from a shallowness that risks cheapening the entire endeavor. Student 1 suggests establishing a framework from the beginning. Quote, on day 1, express the expectations, including diversity and inclusion. Explain that we are expressing music from all different types of communities. There will be opportunities to discuss these issues, and you will have room to take time. Consider putting this statement in the syllabus. Even if the choir does not yet have the music in front of them, it will already be established that culturally sensitive repertoire and social issues will be explored in this class and ensemble. In preparation, trigger warnings should be announced before beginning a work that covers trauma, such as the Seven Last Words. Seek acknowledges that what might not be a trigger for you may certainly be one for someone else. We use a trigger warning when our conversation goes to the otherwise unprepared hurt places. They can also be helpful as you navigate challenging conversations. Trigger warnings are not intended to censor our repertoire curriculum, but are a consideration when guiding the discussions that flow from the curriculum. Student 2 offered very thoughtful suggestions to building the process of learning and preparation for a work of such magnitude. He suggests that frequent check-ins should be offered with a list of resources such as counseling services, websites, etc., that students can use if they so choose. He says, let people know what they are getting into before they get into it, because people do not know what triggers them until they are triggered. These resources aren't just there for the students, but for the teachers to use as well. This will further prove that the conductor is taking a serious and respectful approach to this magnitude of a work. Do the work. Roger M. Holland is a big advocate for conductors educating themselves first, especially when they intend to present music by different communities and/or focus on different community issues. In his article, Performing Religious Music of the African American Experience, he challenges his colleagues, quote, learn the history, do the research, acknowledge the source community, perform the music in a sensitive, informed, and respectful manner that is authentic to the Black aesthetic. This means that white choirs and their conductors should be cognizant of the history of Black music in America, the historical context in which this music is situated, and the ways this music has been appropriated. This is what moves us from potential appropriation or an artistic soundbite to actual effective impact. Ralston concludes that, quote, if the composer or organization is unwilling to do this work when it is better, Ralston concludes that if the composer or organization is unwilling to do this work, then it is better that such projects are left to those who are unwilling. Oh my goodness. I'll say it one more time, forgive me. Ralston concludes that if the composer or organization is unwilling to do this work, then it is better that such projects are left to those who are willing to put in the necessary effort. Student 2 urges conductors to do a significant amount of research before jumping into a piece of work, no matter the background or cultural tradition. Additionally, he encourages the conductor to allow the choir in on this journey of research. He says, when a choir gets a piece, start with a brief overview of the piece, plain and simple, what the words are saying and what they are in reference to. He continues by saying, have the conductor be transparent enough to say what we are doing and what we are trying to accomplish. Otherwise, there can be a white savior trope or tokenism. If it's actually never verbalized, BIPOC people will never know. In the Choral Journal article, If You Don't Know, Don't Assume, the authors reference Marquise Garrett's opinion on the importance of educating both the choir and audience about the about the culture of music that's being performed. He says, unfortunately, not enough people read the program notes. You will have their attention during the concert. Use that time not only to explain the music, but to teach why the music is being performed, why it is of value, why it should remain in the repertoire, and how the particular performance honors the tradition and heritage of a group of people who endured so much.
Our conclusion. At the conclusion of the interview process for both students, we asked the students if they would be willing to perform this particular work, The Seven Last Words of the Unarmed, had it had a proper scene or safe space been created by the conductor, and if they would ever consider performing this work in the future. Interestingly enough, both student 1 and 2 stated that they would have performed the work had the proper scene been set by the conductor and would strongly consider performing the work in the future. Student 1 followed up with her answer by stating, if you give the concert, a theme, the music matters. It allows people to ask questions about their own lives and communities. Student 2 answered from a different angle, stating, these are words that need to live on. As terrible as the murders are and continue to be, those words can be forgotten. I feel that very strongly. As artists, it is our job to stare into the rough parts of life and be made vessels to share with the world what happened. But there is a line where I won't compromise my own mental safety. It is valiant for performers to speak out against injustice and allow their gifts of artistry to be their platform. But we must go further. We must dig deeper and ensure that we are not only servicing the needs of the art, but the students of the art as well. It starts with a connection, building a process, and making certain that we are committed to the work for however long it takes for our students to feel safe, supported, and respected. This is especially significant when presenting the music that deals with trauma, oppression, or hurt of a marginalized community.